Hi everyone. So this is a very strange and very new thing for me. I generally love presenting in person as I get a chance to actually interact with the audience and possibly tell some bad jokes. However, please let me know if the sound is all fine. I do apologize if my dogs go a little bit berserk. There are still people walking around in the streets in Bloem. But hi everyone. I am very, very happy to be here today. This is my first dev-related talk with a security spin on it. As most of you know, I am a security researcher that has a pacemaker, and I have spent the last 3 years very publicly working on these vulnerabilities within the devices. When I decided to do the talk, I fell in love with the concept of an Sbomb, a software bill of materials. However, in the duration for preparing for this talk, I much to my dismay realized that the idea that was initially sold to me would possibly not work. So my talk is entitled, Did We Drop the S-Bomb? I know you guys came for the new silver bullet within medical devices. Well, I hate to disappoint you. You're not going to find it here. What you are going to find is an honest opinion on why this might not be the silver bullet they are hoping it would be. Now, as with all my talks, I have a little disclaimer. Some of my opinions are very unpopular or out there, or my own views and not those of the organizations that I work for or do research for. Again, I just need to say this out there because I get this question at every conference. No, I am not in the business of hacking the device that keeps me breathing and my heart beating. The devices that I generally work on is not connected to anyone. I am not in the business of human testing. So please bear with me as I take you on a journey of the latest and newest ideas coming straight from the FDA and the US, where I am helping out with an organization called I am the Cavalry. Go Google that. If you want to, I can pop the link in the Slack. Who am I? Most of you know me as V. I rarely go by my given name Veronica unless I am in trouble or unless my mother's looking for me. She still calls me by my name, but otherwise just refer to me as V. I love talking all things medical, healthcare, IoT. I'm obsessed by it, you can say, sometimes unhealthily so, but it is what keeps me alive. I will tell you guys my story because people really understand, especially in the development world, why I am so passionate in making things different. I have to say that if you have it for the word waterfall, you might just want to block your ears 1 or 2 times. So I'm calling all device enthusiasts to spend the next hour with me and chat things medical device. Now, you might think from a security and DFIR focused field can fall in love with development. Well, recently I started working with a big medical device manufacturer, and I took the time to speak to firmware engineers, hardware engineers, and security engineers, trying to understand the global picture of what each of these teams do. Now, this has led me to some wild ideas, as they would call it, to make things better. Generally, they know when I start my sentence, just bear with me, this might sound crazy. It might actually be something that is quite simple and has the potential to make things easier for them. I don't want to break any pipeline, any process that these companies take because they do it for a reason. Now I know this is probably going to be controversial, and forgive me if you guys do find it a little bit controversial. But the most valuable lesson that I learned working with a medical device manufacturer is that because they are designing for hardware, they still pretty much follow a waterfall approach. As much as we would like it to move to a more modern agile development focus, this is not possible when designing for hardware. Now, I know people will argue with me about that, But trust me, some have tried, and I'm open to it, and I'm open to have these conversations. But I've realized that the way that they're doing things are specifically because it's for hardware. It's firmware for specific hardware that has to keep hearts beating, keep insulin going, or even keep a patient breathing. Now, we started in 2005 when I kept passing out and bumping my head and looking like my boyfriend's been eating me about. And we soon realized that I had a very rare condition called a third-degree heart block and with white Parkinson-like. And I was only 19. Generally, this is a thing that comes, above 70. When your heart goes in failure, basically means that the signals from point A to B don't go through. And I was in need of a pacemaker / ICD. However, fast forward, I had 2 weeks left to live, and as medical insurance would be, my dad had a knee replacement just before that, and we were outside benefits. Now, I come from a low income family, and I basically went home to die. I had 2 weeks left to live because my heart was failing. Medtronic stepped in and supplied me my device and gave me a second lease of life, gave me 2 little girls, and piqued my interest in this thing that kept my heart beating. Now, I put a picture there for you guys so you just can see how beautiful and magnificent this simple beast is that keeps me going. And one of the misconceptions with these devices is that they're fairly sophisticated. Well, the hardware, not so much, but the firmware is where the whole beauty comes in. But this is where my journey started in 2005. Then in 2015, the battery of my device started running low. Now, basically what happens is you will get a countdown, much like on New Year's when we go 10, 9, 8, well, it goes something like 12 months, 9 months, 5 months. All of a sudden, hey, you need to change your device. Now, some would think it's easy. Well, no, they literally take you into surgery, they give you some drugs, and they basically pull that whole little device out. Now, this is my new device, and this was a smart device. This device was intuitive. And at first I thought, okay, well, we move with the times. It can't be that bad. Sometimes new and intuitive is not necessarily better. Big, bad time in my life where I actually nearly died 3 times during November and December. Now, I know these might be very upsetting, but these are 2 photos that were taken by my husband shortly after I was resuscitated after my device failed to work. The reason that it failed to work was only later discovered to be a faulty wire. So the software was not receiving the electrical impulses from the heart, and because it was very abnormal, the software didn't have any way of interpreting it as a bad event. So this is where I spent my November and December, and this also led to me wanting to understand the design of my device, not but for me, as I've learned, is very low on the non-functional list of important things with medical devices. Now, I know this might come as a shock to some that have watched previous talks, but I had to make this difficult decision. And this also inspired a lot of the work that I'm doing now. A device needs to be functional. It also needs to be secure. But sometimes we build devices so secure that it's no longer functional. I went back to an old device after getting my new device, the upgrade device, that didn't work for me. I had to make the decision as a security researcher whether I'm going to trust the software and the hardware that previously kept me healthy, kept going, was right for my conditions. Because as in everything in my life, everything is just a set of contradictions. I have a very complex set of things that work against each other within my heart, meaning I need a device that is complex in nature and able to handle all the aspects. Now, this was an older device with a very flawed protocol that was in plain text. So not very secure. But again, as a patient and as someone that understands the tech, I needed to make the decision between functional and secure. And in terms of that, I chose functional. Because I can tell you, it's not a fun thing walking into a hospital and your heart stops. If you want to see chaos, that is what I will refer it to. That was not a fun time in my life. Being bedbound because the nurses said I was a full risk at the age of 32 doesn't do much for the ego. But the good news, in January, I got my flawed but functional device. And I've always said that I'm beautifully broken and wonderfully flawed. And my pacemaker reflects that. It's functional issues. There is my device that wasn't that the device was wrong, but the device was wrong for me. And my cables were faulty. So as you can see, this was not a fun time. Now let's go back to what my talk is about. What is an Sbomb, and is this really the silver bullet it claims to be with regards to medical devices? Now, some of my opinions are very unpopular and goes against the grain of everything that you might have heard. I will explain why I feel so strongly about this, because I've been on the other side of the bed as a patient. I've been the researcher, and I've seen how doctors function and how hospitals function internally. I feel that to make the right decisions on what we should address, you should understand healthcare. You should understand the patient perspective, and you should understand the build process. None of these function independently from each other. To make the best decisions, you need to understand the full circle. Much like within any pipeline, you need to understand every aspect and how it fits into that. Otherwise, we end up working in isolation in little silos that do not serve the greater good. Now, everyone here should know what a BOM is, a bill of materials. Now, there are researchers that have introduced a software bill of materials for medical devices. Basically, a list of components or libraries in this instance and known vulnerabilities, much like an inventory. Now, S-bombs and bombs are operationally used. It's an inventory to keep track of what you've used where. For example, 10 years down the line, we want to know that X, Y, and Z, there's a vulnerability. Which devices in our inventory of designs do we need to go fix? It, for me, is a very good log of what you've used where. Okay. Now, software transparency is another thing that everyone's pushing hard for. They are wanting medical device companies to actually make available code portions or libraries that hospitals are in a position to actually identify whether they want to go with X device or Z device. But that's assuming that all code is the same. It is also assuming that you are going to be comparing apples with apples. And everyone that does software design or firmware design can tell you no two coders code the same. No two hardware engineers build the same. So it is relying on medical manufacturers which going for games all work the same. What I've also realized is to what extent software plays a role in our society. We are moving into a more interconnected environmental world, otherwise referred to myself as the internet of shit. Everything's put on the internet, from your fridge, your toaster, my heart, insulin pumps, everything is there, right? Everything is controlled within the Internet of Things. Now, as this plays a foundational role in society as we move forward to this interconnected new way of doing things, much like what's happening at the moment, where everything's gone online, we need to perhaps look at software slightly different. It's no longer just a nice to have, but it's important that it's functional, that it's secure, and that it's usable. But again, I have to ask, would you rather have something that is functional or something that is completely and utterly unhackable? Now, I personally don't think there's anything that someone cannot figure out a way to circumvent. And especially today, there might be someone in a basement very bored, someone in an office very bored. And yes, wink, wink, me. I have gotten up to a lot of research while in quarantine for 4 weeks before coming back from London. Apparently, traveling abroad amidst pandemic's not a good idea. Now, you guys will know Sbomb as a bill of material. There are specifically different ones. There are the manufacturing bill of materials. Within healthcare, that would be the hardware part. Now, specifically with embedded or implanted devices, the hardware is often designed to cater for the firmware. The hardware, the most important thing, the most, biggest asset that they will not give up is CPU and battery life. We want the devices to last 10 plus years. Okay, the longer the battery stays non-depleted, the better. So this leaves a very big responsibility on those people that write the firmware to not deplete the battery. Now, I've had many conversations with firmware engineers, and I would make security suggestions only to learn the most valuable thing is that it might make the lifespan on my device shorter by about 8 years. Now, as a patient, I can tell you, I most certainly do not want to go for this surgery every 2 years. That sucks, it's sore, it's not fun. So again, what would you give up for functionality? Well, a lot of security things I would give up because just because it's possible doesn't mean it's plausible. And that is something I never thought I would say 3 years ago. But understanding how the development of these and design of these products work, I can understand that it's better to have a functional medical device. Then you have your engineering bill of materials. And this is the technical drawings and the functional perspectives of the device. In the industry, they will call them functional requirements. So this is where we actually look at what does the functionality of the device have to be. Then you look at the sales bill of materials, which is basically the finished product. Because these are closed units, meaning that once they've gone through the whole engineering process and build process, they are shipped as a sealed unit. So once your battery basically depletes, they remove the whole device except the leads and replace it. As you saw, half of the device is actually made up of a battery. Cybersecurity bill of materials. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't understand. Most of the security built into medical devices is built in a hardware capacity. It's not necessarily in the firmware. So there is a rule of thumb. Everything that might change will go into firmware. Everything that would not change would go into hardware. Medical works a little bit different than, I think, any other industry. You would also think that a lot of the same processes would be followed. They are slightly tweaked and slightly different, and I'll get to that a little later. But okay, let's just move back and take a step back, breathe with me. It basically, a bomb explains what we bought, how we bought it, and where we're going to buy it, and the instructions on how to assemble the product. Now, most MDMs already do this. They have comprehensive bills of materials. It's part of how they design, how they build, and how they effectively push to market. But here's where the different concept comes with the latest push to make SBOMs part of the responsibility for hospitals. They are stating that an Sbomb can be used to help hospitals make informed decisions. Now, I have a couple of problems with those things, which I will get to later. But I first want to talk about what an Sbomb is, what information it contains, and why this doesn't scratch that itch very much. Now, there's a big movement to design for trust within the MDMs. We want the devices to be trustworthy. We want to believe that all medical device manufacturers design for trust. They design devices that are functional and safe for the patients using them. Recently, cybersecurity has been bolted on in much as what with DevSecOps has done, which is not a thing that I really think is a thing, because security should form part of anything that you design. It's not an afterthought. It's not a bolt on at the end. But in medical devices, it has only recently become an important factor. Now, still, I firmly believe that if you want to make code better and hardware better, you need to listen to what your engineers are telling you. The people that know these devices best are the guys that have built it, the guys that have coded it, the guys that work with it. They are also the guys that we look to when a vulnerability, whether in the hardware or in the software, occurs. I think we do not give these guys enough credit in terms of security. And this is me publicly eating words as 3 years ago when I absolutely went on a rampage towards people that build devices, because I was firmly of the opinion that they can do better. But here's the thing. How do you add security to something that has a 128 kilobit capacity, where every piece of binary is allocated? Security is expensive in terms of battery and CPU on these devices, honestly. Where we can make things safer is on the physician side and on, how the device communicates with the programmer or how the devices work. For example, I have spent hours in ICU as a patient. I have spent hours on the internet reading manuals and going to the FCC and finding hard-coded IPs and usernames and passwords. I have done lots of things that weren't necessarily the right things, but it was easy to access and easy to do. But from a medical perspective, I always say to people, it's not like while I'm having an attack, I can turn around and say to the doctor, please wait, I need to, authenticate username and password. That doesn't work. A lot of security things will to react within nanoseconds to administer clinical therapies. It is effectively this checks and balances and give or take relationship that is complex in nature, because for everything that we add, we take away medical functionality. We take away the doctor's ability to act swiftly. So yes, I have gone back and said that, yes, I understand security is essential, but it's very low on the non-functional scale of things. Now, I would rather have a device that is reliable and functional and available for when a doctor needs to access it, because I would hate for someone to lose precious minutes dealing with authentication errors or a password that's forgotten, or even just changing a password. We know on systems, on web applications, how painful it is sometimes to simply change a password. sorry, but your password, doesn't have the sacrificial lamb and capital letters, special character. You didn't do the rain dance, all those kind of things. And I hate to introduce that complexity to their healthcare system and to doctors, that the main purpose of why they have those medical devices is to make the lives of their patients better, to make diagnoses faster, and to extend lives. But there is a given times we need to understand that security is not the be-all and end-all in medical devices. And yes, I'm going to get into trouble for what I'm saying today, because I'm going against a lot of people that have a lot of opinions. So yes, someone made a comment about dirty laundry. That is an archaic practice where, we want to keep close what we don't want people to see. There is a vulnerability, a responsible disclosure project that is running from the US that we are driving with the Biohack Village from DevConf. We are trying to work on those archaic practices to change. That is a thing that's been bred into them for years and years and years. That is a sad fact. But if you think it's not, look at your companies that get hacked. Until recently, when Liberty stood up, we haven't seen any major company saying, hey, I got hacked and this is how we're mitigating. So the unfortunate thing, it's not just isolated to the medical industry. It is literally an inbred societal thing that we have come with. I always say it's not the fact that you got, breached. It is the fact on how you handle the breach, right? Disclose to your customers what's happened and do it responsibly. If you buy me a coffee when you see me, I will tell you lots of these stories, because incident response is my bread and butter. And there's a lot of companies that don't get that playing open cards in the media. It gets you brownie points. Now, there are two main things that I've looked at in terms of Sbomb for medical devices, and these are ones that they are currently using. It's a software package data exchange, SPDX. This is mostly used for open source media libraries. It's machine readable, and it was created by the Linux Foundation. Now, I know specifically a couple of MDMs make use of software identification, SWID. This is a formal standard that they use. Apologies if my voice is cracking. I'm a little bit sick, but I'm trying my best. Now, it is important for me that we understand the things out there and the things they're proposing for. Now, an Sbomb contains a lot of information on libraries, on, all things that are used. Now, both of these formats, as I will show you a little later, have a lot of the similar information. They are just slightly different in the way that they look. Now, because SPDX is an open source platform, it is more widely used by the smaller organizations that don't have the big monetary funds to push into software. You would also probably be shocked to know that a lot of MDMs actually outsource to smaller dev houses to do certain portions of firmware or certain portions of hardware, because they do it so well. It is made up of different things. Now, they all within this, because it's regulatory medical devices and they have to adhere to every country's regulations. It basically comes to the point that if you want to sell in South Africa and in England and in the US, you will have to adhere to all the regulatory bodies. Now, this becomes very difficult. And this is also one of the one of the requirements for a lot of these things are Sbombs. What do you use? But this is for everything that's not, that's not proprietary. It's not the actual code, it's more the libraries. And this is my biggest gripe with this. Is if you have a lot of proprietary data or code libraries that you use, is anyone going to really understand if I name a library Poison Pixie what it actually does? Unless you know me, because then you'll know that it probably will ransom a system and encrypt all the devices, because I love ransomware. But without context, a lot of this information in the Sbombs are trivial and not really important unless you have the background information. Now, it is very useful to use these things for inventory, but it comes again, the biggest question I have in terms of this is, what is the biggest factor why Sbombs are important? It's used for operational purposes. So who operates the medical devices? Anyone want to take a guess at that? Do you think it's the hospitals, the patient, the technologist? Who would you think is operationally responsible for the devices? Well, it's not the patient, the end user, nor is it the technologist, and this is why. It's not the hospital. The only person that can make changes to firmware or hardware is the medical device manufacturer. The hospital can do clinical changes for patients. Patients can download their data with at-home monitoring. Operationally, the responsibility for this device lies with the manufacturer. And they already do Sbombs. So the new movement that the FDA is taking is to force MDMs to supply hospitals and end users with an Sbomb. Now, I will make my slides available for you guys, but one big thing about the way that I present is that they are more for information purposes. Now, the FDA believes that giving an Sbomb to a hospital and having a team look at it, they are able to make informed decisions in terms of equipment that they use. I have extensively spoken to different hospitals and physicians, the guys that are on the front lines working with these devices, to understand why they choose certain devices. And it's always a clinical reason. In terms of pacemakers and ICDs, one contracts the heart at a certain pace. One shocks the heart out of a dangerous rhythm into a normal sinus rhythm. Some devices have complex therapies that can apply. For example, a rate response where your heart rate falls a certain amount, it will then trigger a therapy response that would pace it at a constant speed. These are different things contained on different devices done by different manufacturers. All have their claim to fame, all have their proprietary way of doing things. Now, there's almost never a security reason for choosing a device. Now, if you look at two devices in terms of an Sbomb and you say, okay, this one, for example, uses a faulty library with authentication of the universal token, but this one doesn't, but B, which is more secure, actually has a lower battery life and doesn't specifically match the patient. I can't see how taking two Sbombs and looking at them would actually aid a hospital in choosing which devices is the better one. There's almost always a clinical reason. This is the proposed life cycle of software that they would like to propose the Sbomb for. Now, this is assuming that the user is the one that maintains, configures, and installs on the device. But in terms of this, it is not the user, but in fact the MDM. And as such, that would be their responsibility and not for the hospitals to look at. The most that the hospitals can control is how these devices are put on the network. Whether or not we're going to segment them, whether or not we're going to run them in a sandbox, whether or not we're going to change the. There are just many things that come in play that the hospital can effectively control. One of the things they cannot control is firmware updates, changes in libraries. Those things fall to the MDM. It doesn't even. Now I'm going to skip these because I want to show you guys what it looks like. So an SPDX representation will give you the version number and the package supplier. But if I just put OpenSSL there, for example, you have no idea how OpenSSL is implemented, right? Yes, a library may well be vulnerable, but it may very well not be exploitable or used in a way that makes it exploitable. When two pieces of software come against each other and one is more vulnerable than the other one, that doesn't necessarily mean one is worse than the other one, right? You have to compare apples with apples. Now, if you work at a hospital and you are the person responsible for the supply chain, if you look at this, would you be able to compare two devices with each other and determine which is the more secure one? I don't think so, because you have no background in how the code or the library is implemented, or even what the implementation is. It is very hard to take this and have something that is of value. I think what is more of value is having a rating in terms of the overall scoring from someone like the FDA that says this device performed at this level. But that too is a snapshot in time. That too is only a portion in time and doesn't get relooked at. Now, medical devices stay in the wild for 10 to 15 years. Now, to just get a firmware update to be pushed through currently in the US takes 6 to 7 months is the soonest that the FDA gets it done. Now, this means even in the slightest, if you make any changes to medical device software, you need to get it relooked at and basically reauthorized by the FDA. It's very, very difficult to make firmware changes fast and effectively. Now, medical devices are one of the most important things, in my opinion, in life currently to treat chronic illnesses and extend lives. Now, just to give you an idea, I got diagnosed at 19. I'm still here at 32. And in terms of that, my life got extended. Now, the FDA regulates over 190,000 different devices. There are 18,000 different firms and 21,000 medical device facilities worldwide. It's a big beast. Now, I can understand why it takes so long to push things through, but I feel that having these uber secure devices that never see the market is of no use to any patient. Instead of having a functional working device that goes to market fast and it can be used by physicians. Now, take into consideration that there are physicians that will go to third parties and propose an idea for a medical device. Now, they don't have deep pockets, and for them, often their whole developmental thing gets stopped by the FDA. Now, of course, the measures have to be strict for devices that are connected to a human being. Because you hack a medical device, well, you could break a human being, meaning you can deny them service, you can stop their heart, you can overdose them on insulin. There are many things that can go wrong. This is not a rebootable system. Although some might argue that you can restart the human heart, it's very difficult to do so when a defibrillator goes haywire. Now, SimSAP was suggested would be a Cyber Med Safety Expert Analysis Board that will be dealing with cybersecurity within medical devices. However, as most things that are regulatory, it takes a lot of time. This was suggested in 2018, which is a very long time ago, and we're in 2020. And now the function for evaluate patient safety risks and deal with all the administration surrounding cybersecurity. Because one of the things that we know in cybersecurity is, there's new vulnerabilities coming out. Someone sees something differently. And I want to urge people that develop firmware and develop code, when you find a vulnerability, also try and find a solution, because it breaks my back that we are in the business of breaking things, but not really in the business of finding a solution to the problem we identify. How we make medical devices more secure is collaboration from people who design, who build, who break. We need people to come together and not only find problems, but find the solutions to the problems. And when you find a vulnerability, please do reach out to the company that does the device or, the hardware, and give them the opportunity to create a patch or a mitigation against it. You might find a patient monitor that is flawed, but you publish that result, and it might end up a patient in the middle of nowhere that's hooked up to an older device. That device gets compromised for someone that does not know better, and in the end, it never notifies the central station at the nurse's table that something's gone wrong with the patient. So do know that if you try and play with these devices over the Internet of Things or the Internet of Things in medicine, you could have someone of flesh and blood on the interested in medical devices on Biohack Village. We have a complete CTF with medical devices that you are allowed to try and break. We actually invited, and the medical manufacturers are involved in trying to get that done. SimSAP, to get back to where I was, is an important factor that the FDA is pushing. It's something to take on the responsibility of cybersecurity and keeping the MDMs in check. But as I said, anything is very slow, and with the pandemic currently, I think cybersecurity is on the back burner. Now, sometimes I wonder if SimSAP really exists. Do they? Do they not? I'm not sure yet. It sounds like a very good idea, but it sounds like a fairy tale at this moment. I want to see more action. I want to see more progress in terms of that. Now, we should not be making changes within healthcare that does more damage than good. Look at the chaos that a microorganism has let loose on healthcare across the world. Can you imagine if we add more security roles to what the physicians and nurses currently have to deal with? Can you imagine if we make it even more difficult for them to use advanced technologies to diagnose or keep people alive? If a microorganism has crippled first world countries, what do you think these changes of putting an Sbomb that they need to take into account on their tables? I would love more feedback on that, because I think we are expecting them to do things that they are not qualified to do. It would be expecting hospitals to have another department that deals, because operationally, they are not responsible for maintaining the firmware or the hardware on a medical device. And this goes for anything like a pacemaker, an insulin pump, a patient monitor, MRI machine, a robotic surgery aid. They are not responsible to medical devices I recently learned is we need to make it better without making it impossible for medical personnel to use it functionally. Functionality cannot come at the cost of privacy and security. And I think often that is a little bit skewed. We are moving into a digital age where security is fundamentally built into it. But we cannot lose sight of the big purpose that medical devices actually exist. They exist to be functional and available for use in an instant, in a nanosecond, where a doctor needs to decide whether or not, to make changes to a pacemaker, whether or not to defibrillate. And these things are all moving onto a network base. Where the hospitals have a responsibility is how they allow these devices to come onto their network. It is very much a segmented role. MDMs are responsible for maintaining the good firmware and the good, hardware of the device. They are the ones that are responsible when firmware updates need to go. We cannot expect hospitals to take on that responsibility as well. The FDA could possibly use an S Form in terms of a regulatory portion to keep track of things. That will have to go through the inventory of all the devices that they've built. That responsibility falls on the MDM. They're already doing that. Now, this is a standard medical ER, even in South Africa. Most of those devices are either connected via Bluetooth, Ethernet, Wi-Fi. I just wanted to display by the end of 2020, the world wants to move to an interconnected medical world. A software bill of materials would not help any hospital to compare two different devices as such. What it's going to tell you is that perhaps one naming convention likes DC and another one likes Marvel, depending on how they name their things. Context and background is everything. Also, adding more administrative requirements to a hospital, it's expecting them to do the impossible. Physicians and technologists in hospitals and nurses are there to do what they are trained for, which is saving lives. They rely and trust that medical device manufacturers build good functioning devices. They expect the FDA to have done due diligence, or any other regulatory body to have done their research and done their checkbox exercises, if that's what you want to call it, to deem something ready for market. So for me, it is a very strong stance that an S Form will not help you differentiate who has got a more secure device. What would tell you what is more secure is perhaps a security rating or an overall rating of a device based on certain parameters. And also, when a device is found to be vulnerable, the first point of call is the MDM, or the regulatory body. They then will assess this. Now, I'm busy currently with a research paper trying to figure out if 30 days is enough for vulnerability disclosure. Now, if you take into account that it's a waterfall process that we go through for, building firmware for hardware, it is fairly hard to even just verify vulnerability and mitigate against it within 30 days. Now, I want to invite you guys. I will be putting in the Slack a Google form that I set up for anyone that has worked not just in medical but embedded firmware to complete it, to help me get pure statistics from around the world. But the responsibility remains the MDMs to ensure that these things are operationally functioning, not that of the hospital. If you look at even bigger hospitals, they still get hit with cyber attacks and they have difficulty dealing and bouncing back. So it is very difficult for them to take on the onus of making sure that the device is built correctly. Now, I've just been told I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to rush a little bit. But it's securing medical devices and building them is a very thankless job. It's not pretty, it's very hard. You know, there's no glorification. I've spoken to these hardware and software engineers, and I've realized that as a patient, they weren't very high on my list to thank. I have recently done so by thanking them and actually talking to the guys that built the device that I have in. And I can tell you that they want to save lives. They want to build things that are functional for patients to extend their lifetimes. I am hoping SimSAP can start being functional and not take as long as it's been taking. Tool for FDA and the SimSAP to have to keep an inventory of devices. This is not going to tell you whether one device is better than the other one or help you hunt for vulnerabilities. I do not want to have the administration of keeping every manufacturer's Sbombs on file and having to go look for a library that's found to be vulnerable with not knowing what the context is behind it. I want to do a call out to people that unless you understand how healthcare and medical devices work, unless you've been a patient, unless you know how doctors function and how a hospital works, do not make suggestions in terms of policy and governance that will break this already fragile institution. It is important to build secure devices, but it's also important to get life-saving technology to market where they can function optimally and save lives. I think we should be tipping our hat to those building software, firmware, and hardware that saves lives, right? But asking them to supply their source code so that apples can be compared with apples is like asking someone, to open up their bedroom to you. It's very invasive and it's very unnecessary. And I promise this is effective, has gotten us where we are today, dealing with a microorganism that has crippled healthcare. Perhaps it's time now, in the time that we have lockdown, to streamline and condense and uncomplicate the world. Often life is not as complicated as human beings make it. Take it from a cyborg. Sometimes simplicity is key. Simplicity is not the enemy. Thank you for joining me today, and stay at home and stay safe and build something that changes the world and makes it better. And a shout out to our medical personnel on the front line. We salute you and we appreciate you, and even the software developers and the engineers working on these devices. I appreciate you. I value you. You guys have changed my life. Thank you. Any questions? Perfect. Thank you again, guys. I'm going to go. Love and leave you. Have a fun conference. Bye.